Hey everyone, welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you. It should be a great evening. I've got a lot of great things to talk about with all of you for tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and away we go.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, 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 everybody. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Should be a fun conversation we're going to have here tonight. It's Thursday evening. I'm here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. We got a lot of things to talk about. I got some opening remarks that I think will be of interest to everyone. And of course, I'll be writing down people's super chat questions. And the second half of the show will be me simply answering people's super chat questions. So if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of our show, shoot me a super chat. That would be awesome because I am here to answer your questions. Plenty to talk about tonight. Plenty to talk about. But since it's worth doing, we should probably just make another announcement. For those of you who maybe are not aware, and for those of you who are, I probably sound like a broken record, but it's okay because it's really gosh darn important. Coming up a week from Saturday and Sunday, there is going to be a great event in Washington, D.C. It's called the Summit Against Hypocrisy. And it is going to be an anti-imperialist gathering, a 2-day national anti-imperialist gathering that takes place in Washington, D.C. You can register right now and attend. It is a free event. We may ask a donation at the door, but that is optional. It's free for whoever wants to come. It's going to be a great event. So sign up and register. We would really love to have you there. Going to be in Washington, D.C. It's going to be great. It's going to be really, really awesome. Guests include the great Scott Ritter. He is confirmed. Scott Ritter, the former UN weapons inspector, the anti-imperialist. Scott Ritter is going to be there. We are booking his hotel and his train, and Scott Ritter is coming, and it's going to be awesome. Garland Nixon, the radio host, Sputnik Radio. You all probably love his content on social media. He's a great commentator. I go on his radio show, The Critical Hour, along with Dr. Wilmer Leon. Awesome. Garland Nixon is going to be there. In addition to that, Peter Coffin, the amazing comedian Peter Coffin, is going to be there. Peter Coffin will be there. Don DeBar, the longtime anti-war activist. Daniel Villa, the WBAI radio host from New York City. Daniel Villa will be there. In addition to that, Jyoti Brar, the famous British internet communist, is going to be there. And because Jyoti is so awesome, I am going to show you the video about Jyoti Brar being there one more time. Ryan Cotton, the man with the flag, Class Analysis, he made this tremendous video about Jyoti Brar. And I'm just going to remind you, Jyoti, the great Jyoti Brar, is coming in from the UK. This is Jyoti Brar.
To side with those, all those, who are objectively fighting imperialism. No matter who is leading them, who is involved in their forces, what ideology they claim to represent. They are spending billions in training, arming and supporting their proxy army in Ukraine. To Today's war in Ukraine is the latest in a string of aggressive wars that were launched by US imperialism when it felt confident in using its status as the only remaining superpower to destroy every vestige of independence or resistance on the planet. The warmongers moved to Afghanistan in 2001, to Iraq in 2003, to Libya and Syria in 2011. And these open aggressions have been accompanied by a string of economic and proxy wars in other countries and other continents. In fact, there is hardly a country in which the USA is not exerting military, economic or political pressure in order to maintain its domination of the planet. For the imperialists, with their never-ending and desperate quest for new sources of profit, money spent in raising the living standards of ordinary workers is money wasted. NATO's leaders are doing everything they can to extend and prolong this war. The imperialists are trying to destroy the independent existence and territorial integrity of all those who oppose their hegemony, in particular, Russia and China. Russia and China are seen as a mortal threat to imperialism because they have the military, economic, industrial and technical strength to withstand the bullying of US imperialism. Because they're home to vast resources the imperialists want to loot. Because they're home to vast numbers of workers the imperialists want to exploit. And because they are increasingly working together and acting as a pole of attraction to other countries who wish to break free of imperialist economic and military control.
So yes, the great Jyoti Brar is going to be there. She's our guest of honor, flying in from the United Kingdom. Also, a lot of great folks from our community are going to be there. Liam, who you just saw, he's going to be there. Ryan Cotton, class analysis, the man with the flag, he's going to be there. I could start naming everybody. Our president, Elizabeth Young, is going to be there. Oh my goodness. Jetta is going to be there. And Bismuth Hertz, he's going to be there. Wow. I mean, it's going to be really something special. Daniel Burke from the Schiller Institute will be there. He's confirmed. He will be representing the Schiller Institute. A representative, Elizabeth, from the Party of Communists, the PCUSA, is going to be there representing the PCUSA. Yeah, I mean, it's really turning into quite an extravaganza, quite a panel. Representatives of the Uhuru movement, it appears, the Black Liberation Organization that's been under attack by the FBI. It's going to be awesome. It is going to be absolutely awesome. So I really hope that folks can make a point of being there. As I mentioned, everyone who comes will get a free copy of my new book, Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. And everyone who goes will get their own copy of this new book that I have put out. So it'll be quite an event. It's going to be quite an exciting weekend. A lot of good stuff is going to be happening. It's a counter to Joe Biden's Democracy Summit. He calls it the Summit for Democracy. We're calling ours the Summit Against Hypocrisy. And if you would like to help this conference happen, shoot us a donation. We could always use a donation. Donations are always appreciated. So shoot us a donation. That would be great. If you aren't able to make it and you want to support it anyhow, shoot us a donation. If you are coming, but you just want to support us, send us a donation. It is going to be great. I have been stocking up the literature table there. The literature table is going to have all kinds of stuff. Peter Coffin's books, Gus Hall books, William Z. Foster books. I mean, it's really just wild. It is absolutely wild. On top of that, next week, I'm going to be going on Lori Spencer, her and Rick. They have this program called Maverick News. I'm going to go on there to talk all about the summit. Tyler, the great Tyler McConnell, who's part of our community. He's going to be speaking. He's going to be giving a great talk. I can't tell you about what it's about yet. I know what it's about. We're working on that. Tyler's going to be there. Wow, it is just going to be a regular great get together in Washington, D.C. You really don't want to miss it. You don't want to miss it. There's a few other surprises in the works for that weekend that I can't really tell you about that are going to make it really awesome. So you don't want to miss it. You want to be there. You absolutely positively want to be there. You don't want to miss it. You really don't want to miss the Summit Against Hypocrisy. Some other announcements. This weekend, the Answer Coalition, Act Now, Stop War and Racism, is having a big anti-war protest in Washington, D.C. And CPI will be represented at that protest. We will have a few people there. We're not making a full mobilization around it the way we did around Rage Against the War Machine because this is really a very narrow, ultra leftist demonstration. We're probably going to hear a lot of hate toward Russia, a lot of hate towards China from the organizers, and it'll be a woke fest. I'm sure that, that anyone who says anything critical about, trans or anything will be like beaten up practically. It's the PSL and that's the way they do things. And they've made a point of excluding a lot of people and being very unfriendly, but it doesn't matter. We support all anti-war protests in this time, right? We're better than them. PSL took a dump all over Rage Against the War Machine. And well, we supported Rage Against the War Machine. We were official backers. And we are also supporting PSL's rally, even though PSL took a dump all over this great rally that just happened, Rage Against the War Machine. We're still supporting their rally because we're better than they are. We're better than PSL, right? And so we're going to be there. And I know the Party of Communists, they're going to have representation there. And that, look, we got to stop the war. It's not about any particular organization. It's not about any particular ego. It's about stopping the war. That is what it's about. That's what it's about. It's about stopping the war. About stopping the war. So we are going to be represented at that demonstration. We absolutely will. I'm also thinking that next week when I'm in DC, I'm going to be in DC starting next week. I am going to attend the vigils that are happening every night to support the January 6th protesters who are locked up. There is a vigil happening every night outside the jail. And we at CPI members, we are going to go and support the January 6th arrestees. We call for a blanket amnesty for all the January 6th protesters because of the role of the FBI in making it happen. That doesn't mean we say that no one there did anything wrong. It's pretty obvious there were plenty of protesters that did something wrong, but the FBI was involved in it. There were so many lies about what happened. There was manipulation to make that day go the way it did. And so because of that, because the role of law enforcement, because the role of law enforcement is so, nefarious, we think that they should have a blanket amnesty. Sorry, I'm just messaging somebody. We think they should have a blanket amnesty. So we're going to go there and support them. And maybe they don't want support from a bunch of dirty, rotten commies. But we're going to do our best to support them. I say we got to free the January 6th protesters. That is my position. They shouldn't be locked up. So there's that. So a lot of great things are coming up. I got a patrons only stream coming up. If you're a member of the Patreon community, don't worry. I haven't forgotten you. I keep saying I'm going to do it and I'm going to do it. I think it might be tomorrow night that we do it. I'll send out confirmation earlier in the day, but we need to have a patrons only stream. I'm sorry I haven't gotten to it. I've been organizing this conference. So yeah, those are the big announcements that are coming up. Those are all the things that are happening. March 18th, anti-war protest, great, important summit against hypocrisy. You don't want to miss the summit against hypocrisy. You don't want to miss the summit against hypocrisy in Washington, D.C. It is going to be a very amazing, important event put on by the Center for Political Innovation. It's going to be great. If you have to go to one event this year, you want it to be this event because it's going to be really awesome. So we're doing that. I guess just a quick reminder, if you haven't already signed up, please go ahead and register for the event. We'd like everyone who's coming to register so we know how many people to expect, and that'll make things go quicker when people are checking in with security and such. So just go ahead and register for the event. It's going to be awesome. Really love to see you all there. So those are the announcements. And as those of you who watch these streams know, the way I generally do things, I give my opening remarks. Then I do the roll call where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And then after that, I then answer super chat questions for the rest of the night. So if you have something you want me to talk about, by all means, shoot me a super chat and I will write it down. All righty, folks. So now I'm going to jump into my opening remarks. And my theme for the opening remarks tonight, I was thinking about what I might talk about tonight, right? There's a lot going on. We saw what happened with the Russian drone. And we saw, there's different news events happening. There's negotiations intensifying in Yemen. It looks like a peace deal maybe in the works. Fingers crossed. Let's hope that happens. All kinds of things are happening. But one item that's been going around social media, I don't know if you've seen it, but there was this woman who went on the Hill and she had written a new book about what she called the indoctrination of children of a generation. And they asked her to define wokeness. They asked her to define what woke is. And she couldn't give an answer. And she even said, like right afterwards, this is going to be one of those moments that goes viral, right? And it was a cringe moment where they asked her what woke means, and she couldn't give an answer. Well, I gave an answer. I made a video that, it's gotten almost 2,000 views or so, on YouTube explaining what I think woke means. And I put it on Twitter, I put it out on Facebook. I explained what I think wokeness is. Wokeness, in my view, is a distortion of leftist politics. Now, we know that in the 1970s, the term woke, it referred to like black liberation, black nationalist politics, and a lot of things that would be labeled conspiracy theories that are associated with black nationalist politics. But that's not what it means anymore. Woke, the term woke has come to refer to a set of political beliefs that are, at this point, a complete distortion and at odds and very viciously hostile to genuine anti-imperialism and socialism. And I talk about how wokeness takes the aesthetic of socialism and Marxism, and it takes the desire for a rebellion, the desire for a sexual and libidinal release, the desire to lift constraints, the anger at authority, and it hijacks that. But it removes the economics of socialism and Marxism. It's not about the workers struggling to control the means of production. It's not about defeating the rule of the world by big monopolist bankers and raising people out of poverty. Instead, it's about resentment against people that are more privileged or perceived as having more privilege. It's about punishing people. It's about shaming people. It's about hating ordinary people because they're not awakened or woke enough. It is a kind of vicious movement that is driven by social media, that is backed by the rich and powerful, that believes in tech censorship, that believes in degrowth, that promotes the idea of overpopulation, the idea there are too many people in the world, wants to reduce consumption to save the world from climate change, wants to degrow and drive down working people's living standards, wants to conduct regime change against governments around the world like Russia and China and Iran and Venezuela and Cuba. That wokeness refers to the primary, the leftist current that dominates Western capitalist and imperialist politics in our time. People call it globalism because it is largely in opposition to the new right. The main forces of opposition, you have Trump in the United States, you have Brexit and the forces in Britain, you have, the National Front in France, and that the forces that oppose it are, what they call the new right, which are like more hard right-wing elements that have emerged, paleo-conservatives and libertarians and such, that have emerged, and that neoconservatism used to be the ruling ideology of the United States. From about the 70s up until the Bush years, neoconservatism was the ruling ideology. After the collapse of neoconservatism during the presidency of Barack Obama, this new ideology came to replace neoconservatism. And it's called wokeism. And it's not communism and it's not socialism because it doesn't believe in growth. It doesn't believe in the working class. It's not anti-imperialist. And it hates working class people. It's anti-working class, anti-populist, right? Socialism is the doctrine of the liberation of the working class. Wokeness hates the working class. It thinks the working class are a bunch of ignorant fools who use too many resources, and it's hostile to the working class. So wokeness, this new woke ideology, is something that I oppose. And I call myself a socialist, a communist, an anti-imperialist, a Marxist, even a leftist. But I reject wokeism. And I made a video explaining what wokeism is. But tonight, because I'm really into political ideology, because I'm really into this history, tonight I'm going to talk about where wokeness came from. That's going to be the theme of my opening remarks for tonight. Where did wokeness come from? And there's many important things to understand about where wokeness came from. Because wokeness is a culmination. It pulls from various different trends. It is a mixed bag. It is a culmination of a number of things that have happened. It draws from this, it draws from that, but it's about saving capitalism. It is about creating a highly controlled authoritarian state to drive down living standards and reduce consumption to save capitalism. It's fascism, more or less. And it's rooted in the failures of capitalism. It's Malthusianism. It's all of these things. But how did left-wing politics get distorted to the point that we have this menace called wokeism? How did this happen? This is a long conversation, and there's a number of things we need to talk about. The first thing we need to understand is that wokeism is not social democracy, but there are some historical parallels between wokeism and social democracy. Social democracy was the name that Marxism, the global communist movement, called itself before World War I. In Russia, the Bolsheviks, they were called the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party Bolshevik, like majority group, right? That was what they were called, right? In the United States, you had Eugene Debs and the Socialist Party. In Britain, you had the Social Democratic Organizing Committee and the Labor Party. In Germany, the biggest Marxist communist party in the world was the Social Democratic Party of Germany. Social democracy was the name that Marxism had before World War I. And the social democratic or Marxist parties of the world were united in an organization called the Second International, or the Socialist International. And it was an organization that united all the Marxist and socialist parties of the world, where they would gather and try to build, working class unity. The idea was workers of the world unite, be loyal to the working class, not your particular nation or country. And so they would have these congresses of the Second International, the Socialist International, and all the social democratic parties of the world would gather. And in the lead up to World War I, as World War I was coming, all the major social democratic and Marxist parties in the world promised they would never support World War I. And in Copenhagen and at The Hague and in so many different cities, they had congresses, and year after year, there would be a resolution to condemn, to say we will never support an imperialist war. And it would always pass. And all the socialist parties would always say, yes, we will never support a war. We will never send workers to kill other workers in a war. We will never do it. But then in 1914, the guns of August roared, and almost all these socialist parties sold out, and they supported World War I. The German Social Democratic Party, they supported World War I. The British Labour Party, they supported World War I. The French Socialists, they supported World War I. The Socialist Party of America, Eugene Debs, he didn't support World War I. He got sent to prison. Rosa Luxemburg, who was a German Marxist, she broke away from the Social Democratic Party. She started her own party called the Spartacus League, the Spartacus Bund, and she didn't support World War I. The Bolsheviks in Russia didn't support World War I. Sylvia Pankhurst in Britain, who was a well-known feminist communist, she didn't support World War I. But the overwhelming majority of these socialist parties supported World War I. They sold out at the decisive moment when the war was actually happening. Karl Kautsky, who was the most famous, most well-known Marxist in Europe, he supported World War I. They all sold out and they supported World War I. It was a betrayal. And Lenin was furious about it. And it was a huge betrayal. And there was a reason that all these socialist parties supported World War I, and that was because they were dominated by higher paid workers, skilled workers. Back in the day, they used to distinguish between skilled trades and industrial workers. If you worked in a factory, you were what was called an industrial worker. However, if you were a plumber or a pipe fitter or a bricklayer or a carpenter, you were considered a skilled worker. You had to go through an apprenticeship. And those skilled workers got higher wages. They had higher wages, and they had seen their living standards go up. And their unions tended to be very racist. They tended to only allow white people in their unions, only allow English speakers, or people born in the United States, or people born in Britain or born in Germany in their unions. Some of them even banned Roman Catholics from their unions. And it was these higher paid workers who had kind of privilege. They dominated the socialist groups. And that's why the Socialist Party of America was never fully anti-racist, because these craft unions, you know, these skilled workers that had privilege, right? They got some crumbs handed to them. They were still workers. They were still being exploited by their bosses, but they got some crumbs handed down to them. And because of that, they would never join. They would never announce support for the struggles of Black people. And they banned Black people from their unions. Right, and that's why in Britain, you know, the labor unions often, you know, the labor movement wouldn't support the Irish people and their freedom struggle, you know, because these higher paid skilled workers, they were big supporters of the British Empire and imperialism. They said they were socialists, but they were still supporters of British imperialism. And that more or less what was happening was that these higher paid skilled workers, these privileged workers, they were being bribed. They were being bribed by Western capitalism. They were getting a few crumbs. And then there were other ways that the governments would kind of bribe and buy off these socialist leaders. One great example was that the government would just hire them, right? And this happened. That you know, the liberal, if the liberals were in power, they would launch a cabinet and they would appoint one of these socialists to be in their cabinet, to be the Department of Labor head, or to be the inspector of workplace safety laws. They would hire some of these socialist leaders to work at universities, at capitalist bourgeois universities. And they would hire them. They'd be getting a wage, right? They don't want to mess that up. They're getting tenure. They're professors. Or they would, in some cases, they would let a socialist write for a mainstream bourgeois newspaper. And Lenin talks about this, about how there were various ways that the reformist sellout leaders of the socialist movement were getting bribed. They were getting bribed. And overall, that the skilled workers that had more money and their labor unions had more influence, they were dominating the socialist groups. And so when World War I broke out, these socialist leaders that had been bribed, these reformists, these sellouts, and the overall skilled workers, the kind of bought off, higher paid workers, the craftsmen, you know, they basically sold out and they supported the war. And this is what Lenin referred to as the aristocracy of labor, right? And that Lenin said basically that because of this, it was the duty of Marxists to go lower and deeper to the real masses, because the socialist movement was bought off. It was controlled by the government. It was controlled by the skilled, privileged craft workers who were bought off, and it was controlled by the professional managerial class. It was controlled by these workers that were quote unquote bourgeoisified, that had privilege. And so the job of the communists was to go lower and deeper to the real masses, to the immigrant workers, to the workers that were unskilled, to the workers who worked in the factories, you know, the workers who maybe English wasn't their first language, to the Black workers, that the communists, their job was to go to the real masses, go lower and deeper to the real masses, because the social democratic parties, the socialist movement, is completely bought off. And that was the divide. And Lenin changed the name of the Bolshevik Party to the Communist Party, because he did not want the Russians to think that his party was the same as this party that had sold out and supported World War I. He said, we're going to now call ourselves the Communist Party, because the Social Democrats have betrayed the workers. The Social Democrats are sending the workers off to die. So that's why, starting in 1917, the Bolsheviks were the Communist Party. After the Russian Revolution, they created a new international called the Communist International. And they had the Third International, and it was the Communist International, and then communist parties were formed. Communist parties were anti-imperialist. Communist parties didn't support World War I. And social democracy then degenerated even further because all the communists had been kicked out or started their own groups. The Social Democrats got even worse. And the Social Democrats, they said, our main enemy is on the left. That was a slogan that they raised. They said the reason that the labor movement is so weak is because these communists are so radical and extreme. So our main enemy is on the left. We need to team up with the conservatives. We need to team up with anyone to just crush those communists. Most labor unions in the United States banned communists from joining. There was just the Social Democrats, because they supported World War I and because the Soviet Union existed and the communists were aligned with the Soviet Union, the Social Democrats went into a crazy anti-communist frenzy. And in some places, they killed communists. In Germany, often there would be communist protests, and the communists had their armed groups that would carry guns. And then the police would come out and there would be shootouts. And these police who would shoot the communists would be wearing their Socialist Party badges, their Social Democratic Party badges on their police uniforms. They'd be killing communists while they're wearing their Social Democratic Party badges. And it became a really bloody division between the Social Democrats and the communists. The communists were anti-imperialist. They wanted to overthrow Western capitalism and imperialism. They wanted a working class revolutionary government. The Social Democrats more and more said that they just wanted to gradually fix up capitalism, just gradually make capitalism more stable. And that the Social Democrats, in a lot of cases, were getting funding from the bourgeoisie. There was something called the Fabian Society. And H.G. Wells was a very famous novelist. He was part of the Fabian Society. And there were a number of very famous intellectuals. Bertrand Russell is a very famous Fabian. And these people, they were calling themselves socialists. They were in the Social Democratic and Labor parties. But at the same time, they were getting funding from the richest and most powerful people in Britain and in the United States. You had the Rand Corporation that was created, where all these socialists would be getting paid lots of money by the capitalists to come up with schemes to make capitalism more stable. And social democracy was this kind of watered down version of Marxism. Marxism says the goal is to seize control of the government and have a working class government. Social democracy says, it's just kind of one step at a time. Gradually, capitalism is just kind of naturally turning into socialism. Communists say that the system based in the West and the big banks and the corporations and their domination of the world is something that should be fought against. And that when they try to enforce that system of imperialism with war, you must always oppose their wars. On the other hand, the Social Democrats said that actually the Western system was the most advanced, because in the West they had an 8-hour workday and they had universal male suffrage, and that when the Western capitalists conquered a country, they were bringing that country closer to socialism because they were bringing those Western values and human rights to that country. And so the communists were anti-imperialists. The Social Democrats were pro-imperialists. The communists wanted a working class revolutionary government. The Social Democrats just wanted to gradually use the government to stabilize capitalism and make things a little more fair one step at a time. And that was the divide. And Social Democrats and communists killed each other. There was a lot of bloodshed, a lot of killing. It was really ugly. But then when fascism came along, the fascists also killed the Social Democrats. So once Hitler came to power in Germany, Mussolini was in power in Italy, and the lead up to World War II, the Social Democrats realized that the fascists wanted to kill them, and so the Social Democrats suddenly became friends with the communists. And so there was an alliance, a popular front against fascism. So it's a strange relationship. But social democracy is not wokeness. Social democracy is just a watered-down version of communism. It is a watered-down version of communism. It's not anti-imperialist. It's not revolutionary. It just wants to gradually change capitalism to be a little more humane and nice, and is very, very opposed to a revolution. That's what social democracy is. And the Social Democrats, as bad as they are, they do want to raise living standards. The Social Democrats were constantly saying we need higher wages. They wanted more wages, higher wages. Social Democrats often advocated things like universal health care, guaranteed health care for everybody. They wanted things like free kindergarten. Kindergarten in Germany was invented by the Social Democrats. It was something that they proposed, child care, let's have kindergarten. Daycare, that was something the Social Democrats believed in. There were certain things that they wanted to stabilize capitalism by enacting certain reforms. So Social Democrats always made clear they wanted to raise living standards. Wokes, on the other hand, want to drive down living standards. They're very open about that. So they're not the same. The Social Democrats also, they tended to very much push the notion of class, right? That they were for the working class and against the capitalist class. They focused on economic issues, and they weren't interested in racism. It was the Social Democrats were always saying, don't talk about racism. The Social Democrats were also saying, don't talk about anti-war stuff and all that. They were all about just trying to improve the conditions of the working class, and they opposed any talk of racism. They opposed any other issues. It was, social democracy was the ideology of corrupt trade union bosses. That's what social democracy was. It was the ideology of the corrupt, pro-imperialist, bought-off trade union bosses. And it was used by the capitalists to fight communism in the same way woke-ism is being used to fight communism. So there are certain parallels. But woke-ism is not social democracy. It is a completely different animal. The very beginning of woke-ism comes from Leon Trotsky. All right, so we know who Trotsky was. Trotsky was a Russian Marxist. He was a well-known Russian communist Marxist. He did not get along with Lenin. He and Lenin had very serious disagreements. But then, and he was in exile most of his life. He lived in Berlin, he lived in Paris, he lived in New York City. And then when the Russian Revolution happened, he was Russian, he was living in New York City. He got on a boat and he went back to Russia. And Trotsky saw that the Bolsheviks were the main party, they were going to win. So Trotsky apologized to Lenin and he joined the Bolsheviks in July of 1917. Trotsky joined the Bolsheviks and he became a very important leader of the Bolshevik party, right? He was a very good speaker. He was the spokesperson for the Red Army. He was like the chief propagandist of the Red Army during the Russian Civil War. But after Lenin died, there was a divide in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And the divide was over the question of, did they want to build a strong socialist country? Did they want to build socialism in one country? Or did they want to follow Trotsky? And did they want to instead have what he called the permanent revolution? Stalin was saying, we need to industrialize, we need to raise living standards, and we need to sign peace treaties with the British and the French and the Americans. We need to bring in American engineers and scientists to help us set up our industries, right? The Koch brothers, Fred Koch, Stalin hired him, right? He was put out of business by the American oil companies. Fred Koch, the father of the Koch brothers, he was an American chemist who figured out a new way of turning oil into gasoline, right? Thermal cracking. And the American oil companies put him out of business. So Stalin hired him, and Stalin made him rich. And he was hired by Stalin to set up the oil industry in the Soviet Union, right? Henry Ford helped set up car factories in the Soviet Union. And that Stalin realized that they were going to raise the living conditions of the people in the Soviet Union, they needed to sign peace treaties with the Western capitalist countries and have trade with the Western capitalist countries. Trotsky didn't agree with that. Trotsky said, no. The Soviet Union should be a military state. Everyone should be drafted into the military. And we just use the Soviet Union as this permanent base to march communism into the rest of the world. Well, that wasn't going to work. And the population in the Soviet Union did not want that. The Russian Civil War, millions of people had died. The country was barricaded. The population in Russia, they wanted their living standards to go up. Right? They wanted their living standards to increase. And so when they had a vote, the Russian Communist Party overwhelmingly rejected permanent revolution and instead embraced Stalin and his theory of socialism in one country. And socialism in one country by Stalin was very successful. They built the world's largest hydroelectric power plants. They electrified the whole country, the world's biggest steel mills. They just rapidly raised that country up. However, Trotsky was not happy with it. He felt that they were selling out the world revolution. So eventually, Trotsky, because he was factionalizing and trying to stir up, even after he lost the vote, he was trying to kind of undermine and conspire against Stalin. Stalin expelled Trotsky from the Soviet Union. And Trotsky, first he went to Turkey, and then he went to France, and eventually he went to Mexico. And Trotsky was a renegade communist, and he started his own wing of communism that was against the Soviet Union. And his wing of communism, he started the Comintern, the Communist International. They were the third international. So Leon Trotsky started what he called the Fourth International, and the Fourth International were Leon Trotsky's. So there you go. And the Fourth International, they were Leon Trotsky's followers. And they were a wing of communism that was against the leadership of the Soviet Union. And a lot of intellectuals, a lot of middle-class elements joined the Trotskyites because the Communist Party in the United States, it was like 100,000 members. It was a very big party. In France, it was well over 1 million members. These communist parties were huge. And so in any big organization, you're going to get people that they aren't happy with it. They're not satisfied. They're naysayers, kind of. And so if you were a naysayer, if you didn't, if the Communist Party didn't make you happy, if you thought they were not good, you joined the Trotskyites. And the Trotskyites became a collection of like communist rejects, communist misfits. You didn't fit in the Communist Party, you joined the Trotskyites. And to be fair, the communist parties were very authoritarian in how they were set up, right? That they were very, there wasn't much room for debate. So it's to be fair that a lot of smarter people, a lot of intellectuals, a lot of writers and stuff felt kind of stifled by the authoritarian practices of the Communist Party. And so it made sense that a lot of them would feel like the Communist Party was too rigid and bureaucratic, and so they would join the Trotskyites. And the Trotskyites were just the alternative communist movement. And Leon Trotsky spent the final years of his life, he was more or less a professional anti-communist. He just went around telling people why Stalin was a sellout, why Stalin was a traitor. William Randolph Hearst, the pro-fascist newspaper tycoon in New York City, paid Leon Trotsky to write a whole big article, Why the Soviet Union Will Fail, Why It's Doomed, by Leon Trotsky, the front page. Leon Trotsky was just this professional anti-communist. And that's what he was. 1939, like right as World War II is starting, the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany. It wasn't an alliance. It was a non-aggression pact. It was an agreement that the Nazis would not attack the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union would not attack the Nazis. The Soviet Union had gone to France, and they had had a treaty like that, and then France pulled out of it. And they'd gone to Britain, and Britain would never sign a treaty like that. They tried to get the United States to sign a treaty like that. They had tried to get all the non-fascist countries to sign a treaty like this, and none of them would. So in protest, basically, because they couldn't get a non-aggression agreement or an anti-fascist alliance with any of the Western capitalist countries, and except, they went to the fascist, Nazi Germany, and they said, okay, and they signed a non-aggression pact in 1939. And that was a really big deal because the Soviet Union had been really friendly to Franklin Roosevelt. It had been really friendly to other anti-fascists and such. So for them to flip and sign a non-aggression pact with Hitler, that was a big game change. Roosevelt was very angry that this happened, and it was a big shift because the communists had been aligned with the global anti-fascist movement. And then they shifted, then they switched. So in 1939, that was a big deal. And there was a huge public relations campaign against the Communist Party for doing that. In the United States, the Trotskyites, they even composed a song to the tune of My Darling Clementine. They had a song up in Moscow, in the Kremlin, in the fall of 39. There's a Russian and a Prussian writing up the party line. Leon Trotsky was a Nazi, and we knew that for a fact. The Pravda said it, and we read it before the Stalin-Hitler pact. But now the Nazis, hotsy-totsy, that is now the party line. So, it goes on. But it's like they were, there was this whole reorientation. And the Time magazine started referring to the Communist Party USA as the communazis. That's what they started calling them, the communazis, right? And it was this huge public relations campaign that the Soviet Union had betrayed Roosevelt, had signed a deal with Hitler, and it was this big campaign against the Communist Party. So Leon Trotsky, now he said, well, technically the Soviet Union had the right to sign that deal, but they should have been more principled about how they did it. They should have explained it. But there were a group of people in the Trotskyite movement in New York City. This is very interesting. A group of New York City Trotskyists who said the Soviet Union could not be a socialist country anymore. Trotsky, his position, he said the Soviet Union was what he called a deformed or a degenerated workers' state, meaning it was socialist in its economic foundations, but it was led by a corrupt Stalinist bureaucracy. Well, this faction that emerged in the New York City Trotskyists, they said, no. The Soviet Union is not a workers' state anymore. It's state capitalism. It's bureaucratic collectivism. It can't be a socialist country because no socialist country would ever sign a deal with Hitler. And so they had a big fight with Leon Trotsky. And it was 1939. Leon Trotsky wrote a book called In Defense of Marxism that was arguing the Soviet Union was still economically socialist. And then James Cannon, the leader of American Trotskyism, he wrote this book, The Struggle for a Proletarian Party. And it was about how there was a big fight, and almost the majority of the American Trotskyists quit. They quit Trotskyism, and they joined this new movement. I don't know what you want to call it, but they broke with Trotsky in 1939. And they were known as the New York Intellectuals. And these folks are the very beginnings of wokeness. There's a very good book all about this, and it's called The New York Intellectuals, The Rise and Decline of the Anti-Stalinist Left from the 1930s to the 1980s by Alan M. Wald. And a lot of these folks eventually became neocons. But they were New York City intellectuals: Hannah Arendt, Mary McCarthy, Max Shachtman. They were James Burnham, Sidney Hook. It was a big collection of people. Irving Kristol. These were people who had been Trotskyists, but they broke with Trotsky over the Soviet Union. And if you read what Trotsky wrote about them, and if you read what James Cannon writes about them in The Struggle for a Proletarian Party, they argue that these folks are middle-class intellectuals. They're anti-populist. They're afraid of the working class. They see the working class as taking away their middle-class independence. These people they're not factory workers. They're not ordinary working people. They are middle-class intellectuals who are afraid of the workers. They're afraid of the mob coming to take away their treasured individuality. They see themselves as superior to the working class. That's what they were. They were college professors. They were writers. They were intellectuals, etc. They were afraid of the working class, and they had to cut themselves off from working class power in the Soviet Union. They equated the Soviet Union with Nazi Germany because they saw them as both a situation where the mob, the rabble are mobilizing. And those folks, the New York intellectuals, cut ties with Trotsky. And I will read you. This is the most telling. One of these people, a guy named Irving Kristol, His New York Times obituary is utterly amazing. Because in his New York Times obituary, this is what he says. I am reading it. I will drop the link in the chat. In 2009, he died, and his 2009 obituary, this is what he said. This is Irving Kristol. This is what he said. I will read to you from his obituary. This is about how he stopped being a socialist. And it's pretty sickening. This is what he wrote. This is what he wrote. I'm skimming through the article. I quoted this many, many times, but there we go. He said, drafted into the army with a number of Midwesterners who were street tough and often anti-Semitic, he found himself shedding his youthful, radical optimism. I can't build socialism with these people, he concluded. They'll probably take it over and make a racket out of it. In his opinion, his fellow GIs were inclined to loot, rape, and murder, and only army discipline held them in check. It was a perception about human nature that would stay with him for the rest of his life, creating a tension with his alternative view that ordinary people were to be trusted more than intellectuals to do the right thing. After the war, well, anyway, that's how he stopped being a socialist, is he got drafted into the army. He got drafted into the army, met a number of Midwesterners who were street tough and often anti-Semitic. He found himself shedding his youthful radicalism. I can't build socialism with these people, he concluded. They'll probably take it over and make a racket out of it. In his opinion, his fellow GIs were inclined to loot, rape, and murder, and only army discipline held them in check. It was a perception about human nature that would stay with him for the rest of his life, creating a tension with his alternative view that ordinary people were to be trusted more than intellectuals to do the right thing. Yeah. So, Irving Kristol didn't like the working class. He thought the working class were no good, and he thought the intellectuals should rule over the working class. Kind of a confirmation of what's written in here. After World War II, Irving Kristol, who was still kind of calling himself a Trotskyist, he got hired by the CIA. The CIA hired him to run the Congress for Cultural Freedom. This is who paid the piper, the CIA in the Cultural Cold War. A Trotskyist magazine called Partisan Review, which was like an intellectual magazine these New York intellectuals had, started getting CIA funding. The CIA created this new entity called the Congress for Cultural Freedom that was funded by the CIA and by the Rockefeller think tanks and the Ford Foundation. And they started giving money out to intellectuals that were against communism, but were also critical of Western capitalism. And the CIA was very carefully funneling money to leftists. But the leftism that these people were promoting was a totally different brand. It was a totally different brand of leftism. Susan Sontag became a very prominent figure in these circles. She was an essayist, and Susan Sontag, she wrote an essay called Notes on Camp about how she thought American consumer culture was sickening, and she wrote an essay called Fascinating Fascism, where she argued that the filmmaker, the German Nazi filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl, that her photo exhibit of African tribes was somehow fascist because it glorified strength and community, and that Susan Sontag, they started pumping her work. Hannah Arendt was a New York City intellectual. She'd been a Trotskyist, and Hannah Arendt, she was one of these people. She was getting funding from the CIA, and she wrote this whole book about totalitarianism. And she said that the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were the same, and that there's 3 attributes of totalitarianism. And eventually, when Israel arrested Adolf Eichmann, Adolf Eichmann was a Nazi war criminal. He'd run the gas chambers in Nazi Germany. He fled to Argentina. Israel apprehended him from Argentina, and they put him on trial. And they had Hannah Arendt go to the trial. And Hannah Arendt wrote a disgusting book called Eichmann in Jerusalem. And the book Eichmann in Jerusalem basically argues that there's nothing special about Eichmann, this Nazi war criminal who gassed people and murdered people. He was just a normal person. And the point of her book is that deep down, ordinary people are all Nazis. Ordinary people are all bloodthirsty Nazis. And that's why populism is bad. And that's why communism and fascism are the same thing. And that you got to control these inferior rabble, the ordinary working people, because if they ever get together, you're going to have Nazi Germany, or you're going to have, Stalin's gulags, or you're going to have something evil, because deep down, ordinary people are evil. The Congress for Cultural Freedom, it started out just trying to push Trotskyism and an anti-Soviet version of leftism. But pretty soon it degenerated into anti-populism. The magazine Der Monat, which was funded by the CIA in Germany, they hired Theodor Adorno, and they promoted the Frankfurt School, which was a deviant wing of Marxism. It was a Marxist philosophy education center. And Theodor Adorno, he wrote this book, which I have right here. It's called The Authoritarian Personality. The Authoritarian Personality. And it's all about how, if you're the kind of person who would fight for a cause, if you're the kind of person who believes that truth exists, if you're the kind of person who would give your life for a mass movement, if you're the kind of person that would make sacrifices, you're what's called an authoritarian personality. You're a dangerous person, right? And that good people are like Theodor Adorno and Hannah Arendt and Irving Kristol. They think there is no right and wrong. I think everything's a matter of opinion, that there is no truth, right? But people who believe in morality and right and wrong, people who want to change the world, people who want to live for a higher purpose, they're all really dangerous, and they have to be controlled. And that's this whole book, The Authoritarian Personality. This was CIA work. I mean, it was done in coordination with people who worked at the Tavistock Institute, which was a British intelligence propaganda study center. And they did this whole study. They interviewed all kinds of people to determine what is the personality of a fascist, what is the personality of a Nazi. And they basically said it's anyone who believes in anything. Okay. And that was the case. And this was kind of the beginning of it. What started with the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Hey, how are you? Okay, writing it down. What started with the Congress for Cultural Freedom continued, and it further developed with the color revolution industry. George Soros was a Hungarian billionaire, and in the 70s and 80s, he started funneling money to dissidents in the Soviet Union, funding art galleries in the Soviet Union for young Soviet artists to, display their paintings, and helping Soviet filmmakers get funding to make their movies. And the whole time they were looking for anyone among the intellectuals, anyone among the Soviet artists and writers and professors who was against communism. They started getting funding. Soros was helping funnel money to dissidents in the former Soviet Union. And this is bragged about. If you go to the Open Society website, they openly brag that this was done. This is not a conspiracy theory. Right? This is something they're very proud of. And that, In the late 80s, we saw the overthrow of communism throughout 1989 in East Germany and Czechoslovakia, Romania, many countries we saw communism fall. George Soros, this Hungarian billionaire who was working with American intelligence, had been funneling a lot of money to intellectuals in the Eastern Bloc to make it happen. And the color revolutions were using this different brand, right? This different brand of leftism. Right? The people that marched in the various countries of the Eastern Bloc and eventually in the Soviet Union, many of them would have said they didn't believe in capitalism. Many of them would have said that they believed in socialism with a human face, democratic socialism, humanist socialism. Many of the people who were involved in bringing down the Soviet Union, bringing down the Marxist-Leninist governments of the Eastern Bloc, they thought that they were for neither capitalism or socialism. They were just for more freedom. And it was about freedom for the intellectual. And they were pushing this ideology of Hannah Arendt and Susan Sontag that equates all authoritarianism or all mass movements, fights for the freedom of the intellectual. That's what was going on. And we saw with the overthrow of the various Marxist-Leninist governments that this particular brand of socialism was being used by the CIA. This anti-populism, anti-fascism, anti-totalitarianism, global consciousness raising movement was being used by the CIA. Now, what's also interesting, and this is another layer to this that's very interesting, nuclear power. In the United States, there has been a big divide among the deep state for a long time. There's a whole book about it here called The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby. Talks about how there's the Eastern establishment, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the DuPonts, the New England old money that's tied in with Britain, and there's the military-industrial complex, the weapons manufacturers, and that there's a constant push and pull. The CIA, it's tied in with the Ford Foundation and the Rockefellers and George Soros and others. They tend to have a more liberal worldview. And the military-industrial complex that wants to make lots of money and blow things up, and they're more conservative and tied in with the John Birch Society and the hard right-wing, neocons and others. And then this is a push and pull that has gone on in the American power structure for a long time, right? John F. Kennedy was with that New England establishment, and when he was killed, people reported that all the officers in the military would have jumped up and down and cheered because they thought he was a pansy who was soft on the commies. The military-industrial complex was very happy that Kennedy was killed. Richard Nixon, he was in with the military-industrial complex, and it was the New York Times and the Washington Post that really pushed the campaign to bring down Richard Nixon. Thank you, Lisa. I do appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate your support. And that there was this push and pull within the deep state between the CIA that tends to be liberal-ish and soft power and is thinking strategically with the New York Council of Foreign Relations, etc., and the hard right-wing military-industrial complex that is very anti-communist and wants to make a lot of money selling weapons. There's this push and pull. In the late 70s, and especially in the 80s, this fight took on a whole new character because of nuclear power. The companies in the United States that are involved in creating nuclear power plants are also companies that are involved with making nuclear weapons. It tends to be companies tied to the military-industrial complex. They are the ones that are opposed to or that are in favor of nuclear power because they want nuclear weapons. That's who is running the nuclear industry in the United States. It's not like that in other countries. In France, the nuclear power is all government controlled. The founder of the French nuclear power industry was a communist physicist, a communist party member. It's a little bit different in France. In the United States, nuclear power is tied in with the military. Whereas in the circles of power, who is it who are the biggest opponents of nuclear power? Big oil, the Rockefellers, ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. They are big opponents of nuclear power. Why? Because it'll put them out of business. And this is very well documented. Eric Wahlberg talks about it in my new book. I quote sources about this, that the main source of funding against nuclear power has always come from big oil companies because nuclear power will put them out of business. You won't need to burn oil for electricity anymore if you've got nuclear power. Nuclear power is way more efficient than oil when it comes to creating energy. And, we saw, the Texas power grid in the winter, it froze. Do you remember this? Well, no nuclear plants went off. It was all the oil in Texas. They got a lot of oil. A lot of their electricity comes from oil in Texas. And it was those oil wells that froze. That's how the power went off in Texas. Well, nuclear power doesn't do that. Nuclear power is way more efficient. Way more efficient. It's way more efficient than coal. It's way more efficient than windmills and solar panels. Nuclear power is a very efficient way of making power. But you had the 3 Mile Island accident that took place where, there was a very serious nuclear disaster during the Carter administration. You also then had the Chernobyl accident in the Soviet Union. And so there started to be protests against nuclear power that were being paid for by big oil and by the military industrial and big oil was promoting them because they wanted to get rid of nuclear power. And they were that CIA wing of American power, that Eastern establishment, the liberal wing of the American establishment, the liberal wing of the American establishment that was trying to put, push back against the military industrial complex, also didn't like nuclear power. And they started mobilizing the anti-nuclear movement. And there had already been a movement against nuclear weapons, which was a good thing, right? Nuclear war, not good, right? Nuclear de-escalation, good. But the movement against nuclear weapons and the movement against nuclear power combined. And the left, if you look at the 1980s left, the focus of leftists in the 1980s was on opposing nuclear weapons, opposing nuclear power. And they had big, huge marches where they equated nuclear weapons with nuclear power. And it was like the Soviet Union should de-escalate the arms race, and we should get rid of the nuclear power plants, and we should go back to nature. And the Malthusian angle, which has always been popular among those New England establishment folks. They've always been Malthusian. They think average people, there's too many people in the world. They want to reduce the population. The Rockefellers were on the board of the Neo-Malthusian Society. They paid for Margaret Sanger and her work promoting birth control because they wanted to reduce the population. Prince Philip in Britain was notorious for his statements supporting Malthusian ideas about overpopulation. I mean, this is a long-standing belief among some of these elitist old money families. They want to reduce the human population, drive down living standards, grind the world into poverty, reduce consumption. And that got combined with the movement against nuclear power and the movement against nuclear weapons. Whereas the hard right, they were all about, the military industrial complex. I think they had a slogan, what is it? More nukes, less kooks, and they were all about nukes and weapons and kill the commies and all of that. And that was a moment where you'll notice that the major communist parties in the United States flipped. And this is really interesting. I was in the Workers' World Party for many years. I know a lot of people who were in the Communist Party. And both of those parties knew that something was wrong with the anti-nuclear power movement. Sam Marcy always insisted that the Workers' World Party never say it was against nuclear power. It said it should say it's against capitalist ownership of nuclear power. It's for public control of all utilities, public control of it. But Sam Marcy said, in socialism, nuclear power would be okay. And we defend the right of socialist countries to have nuclear power plants. Whereas the Communist Party took a similar position. And in fact, Victor Perlow wrote an article for the Daily World all about in defense of nuclear power. And that, yes, Chernobyl was a disaster, but nuclear power is not inherently bad. The problem is that we don't trust the capitalists. We want safety. But this idea that nuclear power is inherently bad, that you can't play God by splitting an atom, this isn't Marxism. This is not Marxism. Right? This is silly idealism. The idea that we need to reduce consumption, we need to go back to nature, we need to grind the world into poverty. This isn't Marxism. This is Malthusianism. This is anti-human ideology. Well, the communists understood that. But because these protests against nuclear power were so big, because that was also against the military-industrial complex and against the arms race, and because the Soviet Union was actively telling its supporters that the main threat was the nuclear arms race, right? That Ronald Reagan running up the military budget, forcing them to spend more money on more nuclear weapons, that was the main threat to the Soviet Union at the time. The communists said, all right. And a lot of them threw in the towel. The Communist Party changed its position and turned against nuclear power. The Workers' World Party never talked about what their position was and basically just joined the anti-nuclear power mobilizations. And they basically went along with the movement, right? There was this hippie counterculture movement that was against nuclear power. And the communist groups all joined it, right? And that happened. And the communist groups all just kind of embraced this idea that nuclear power is bad. And the Maoist groups and the Trotskyist groups, there were a few exceptions. The Spartacist League, they took the position, they defended nuclear power. LaRouche and the LaRouche organization, they were huge supporters of nuclear power. But for the most part, the communist groups all basically threw in the towel and joined this mobilization. And then there was the fall of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union fell, right? There was a color revolution in the Soviet Union. The Communist Party, the Soviet Union was dissolved. The Communist Party was out of power. And in Russia, the economy of Russia was just being devastated. It was being just devastated. They call it austerity. It was economic genocide. The population, they'd all had guaranteed jobs and guaranteed health care and guaranteed pensions. And it was all just gone, right? It was mass unemployment. In the 90s in the former Soviet Union, in Russia, they had 30% unemployment. Can you imagine 30% unemployment? Right? When we get 5% unemployment, it's bad in the United States. But this is 30% unemployment. People who visited Russia during those years talk about how around all the subway stops, there'd be old people trying to sell you their clothes so they could eat, or trying to sell you yesterday's newspaper, saying, "Can you just give me anything so I can give this newspaper so they could eat?" It was a disaster. The population of Russia decreased by 10% during the 90s. It wasn't all people dying. It was a lot of people just fleeing, but it was an economic disaster. The overturning of socialism, the restoration of capitalism, selling the country off to the highest bidder, sex trafficking went through the roof, suicide was through the roof, heroin and drug addiction and organized crime, and it was a nightmare. The 1990s was a really bad time for Russia. And during that period, as this was happening, and as people in the former Soviet Union were watching their country just fall apart, they had an election. And they elected a government that promised to stop the austerity, a government that promised to renationalize industries, give people back their guaranteed jobs, etc. And that government was a coalition government. It was called the National Salvation Front. And it was the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, and it was some Russian nationalist parties, and some Slavic nationalist parties, and it was a mixed bag, right? It was some far right-wing nationalist parties, and it was also some communist and left-wing parties. It was a coalition of different forces, but it was unified around stopping austerity. That was the main issue. They were saying they wanted to stop austerity. They wanted to stop the economic demolition of Russia, and they got elected. And immediately they started trying to block Boris Yeltsin's economic demolition of the country. So Boris Yeltsin in 1993 declared a state of emergency, a state of emergency, not an economic state, but just a state of emergency. And he dissolved the Duma, or the parliament in Russia. It was called the constitutional crisis of 1993, Black September, where the people of Russia had voted to stop the austerity, voted for communists and nationalists to stop the austerity. And Yeltsin, who was the president, who was a puppet of Bill Clinton and a puppet of the West, said, all right, no, you don't. And so the members of parliament, they refused to leave. And so the military was sent out and they shelled the parliament. Tanks were lobbing shells and blowing up the parliament. And communist activists were in the streets protesting and fighting with the police. 187 people died. It was a disaster. Black September 1993 in Russia. It was a nightmare. It was just an utter nightmare economically. and it was a disaster. And the elected government was dissolved and forced out by a puppet of the United States. Now, at the time that this was happening, very few Western leftists protested it or did anything about it. Why? Why? Because of the fact that Western leftists all got the memo from the CIA that the parliament in Russia, this National Salvation Front, was a red-brown alliance. That was the term that was used, a red-brown alliance. And Boris Yeltsin, when he dissolved the parliament, he said, I'm dissolving a red-brown alliance. Red being communists, brown being Nazis. He said this is a red-brown alliance. Now, anti-Semitism was what that was a problem. I understand even among some communists. There was communist anti-Semitism. There was anti-Semitism, especially among these nationalist parties. And yes, there was a lot of homophobia. There was a lot of, some of these parties that were anti-austerity were right-wing and nationalistic and anti-Semitic. And I don't agree with that, obviously. But that's not why the Russian people voted for them. They didn't vote for them because they wanted to kill the Jews. They didn't vote for them because they wanted to kill the gays. They voted for them because they wanted their jobs. They wanted to be able to feed their children. They wanted to stop having their country be economically demolished. They wanted to stop having their country be sold off to the highest bidder. The National Salvation Front won the elections not on a platform of anti-Semitism, on a platform of stopping austerity. However, in all the socialist magazines, Democracy Now! and Z Magazine, in these times, all the leftists were being told that the National Salvation Front in Russia is a red-brown alliance, and that if you support them, you're supporting fascism. That was the memo. If you support the Russians trying to stop austerity, you're supporting fascism. Now, the Workers' World Party didn't listen. And the Communist Party USA, to some degree or other, didn't listen. But for the most part, the Trotskyites, the Maoists, they all just, oh yeah, we don't want to support fascism. And they turned their back on Russia. And that was a moment where you could say that the global communist movement was more or less under the control of Western capitalism. When you have the communists in Russia winning an election and then having the government overthrown by a US puppet, and US communists don't support them, at that point, Western Marxism is under the control of Western intelligence. It's under the control of the CIA. And wokeness is a culmination. It is the Malthusianism that came from the anti-nuclear movement in the 80s. It is the anti-populism of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. It is the anti-working class sentiments of the Shachtmanites and the New York intellectuals. It is the red-brown alliance that accuses working class people who want to stop austerity of being Nazis and fascists. Woke-ism is a combination. It is George Soros and the ideology of the Cover Revolutions. Woke-ism is a mixed bag. It is the development over the course of the Cold War and of Obama's presidency. It is the development of a new form of fascism that is fake leftism, fake leftist politics, and it pulls from the New York intellectuals, and it pulls from the anti-nuclear movement, and it pulls from the Congress for Cultural Freedom and Hannah Arendt and Susan Sontag, and it pulls from Boris Yeltsin and George Soros. It is a mixed bag, but in its essence, wokeism is anti-populism. It's the idea that working class people are bad and need to be tightly controlled, and that if they mobilize and fight for their rights, that makes them Nazis. It is degrowth. It is the idea that we need to reduce the population, reduce living standards, impoverish people, grind people into poverty. It is a politics of resentment, a politics that says that the focus should be on anger. The focus shouldn't be on trying to change society, but on resentment. If someone has it better than you, if someone has privilege over you, if someone's had a better life than you, right? It's about resentment. It's about finding targets you can see, right? And this is interesting about anti-Semitism. It's very similar to anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is misplaced class consciousness. We can't see the ultra-rich, the people who own the banks and the major factories and industries. We can't see them. But historically, you can see the Jewish store owner in your neighborhood, right? In New York City, there's a lot of anti-Semitism among African Americans in Brooklyn. I live in Brooklyn, right? And a lot of African Americans really don't like Jews. And the reason for that is that they see Jewish store owners in their neighborhood, and they feel like, oh, why do black people not own the stores in the black neighborhood? Well, at the end of the day, the store owner on their corner is not the one who's oppressing them. They're being oppressed by American capitalism and imperialism, but they can see that store owner, right? And that anti-Semitism is often, it is anger at the privileged person that you can see. Jews are perceived as being middle class, and you can see the middle class. You can't see the big bourgeoisie. Rockefeller is not walking through your neighborhood. Carnegie and DuPont are not walking through your neighborhood. But a lawyer, you'll see a lawyer and he lives better than you, and he has a different set of values than you do. And that anti-Semitism, and this is like, I'm not the first person to have said this. A lot of people have pointed this out. Anti-Semitism is often a mobilization of working class resentment against the middle class. That's what it is, right? And that the anti-Semitic tropes about Jews that anti-Semites believe tend to be stereotypes associated with the middle class. For example, if you own your own business, you're probably going to make more money than somebody who just gets a paycheck, but you have to be really cheap, because every cent that you got has to go back into your business. So middle class people, they have more money, but they tend to also be really much tighter with it because they're running their own business, which they have to pay for, right? And that's the stereotype about Jews. And it's a middle class stereotype. Working class people, they can spend their check and then they get paid 2 weeks later. It's a little bit of a different relationship with money. And that working class people will often perceive middle class people as being cheap, right? Also, middle class people tend to be not as socially conservative, right? And that's part of the anti-Semitic drive too, right? That Jews are all sex perverts, or Jews are all gay, or whatever, Well, working class people tend to be more socially conservative, more religious, etc. Whereas middle class people tend to be more socially liberal. They tend to be more open to non-conforming lifestyles, more skeptical about religion. And so when it gets down to it, in a lot of cases, anti-Semitism is based on this perception that Jews are middle class, and it is the resentment of working class people against the middle class, right? And it's not good, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not the middle class who's oppressing the working class. It's the big bourgeoisie. It's the big monopolies. It's the imperialists. But you can't see those folks. You don't see them. They don't walk through your community. They're not in your neighborhood. And that and it's very similar to the bigotry against ethnically Chinese people in the Pacific, for example. If you go to Malaysia, right? You go to Malaysia, there's a lot of hatred in Malaysia for ethnically Chinese people. Ethnically Chinese people in Malaysia tend to be more middle class. They tend to own their own businesses, and the stereotypes about them are very similar to anti-Semitic stereotypes. So much so that there are imams, like Muslim imams in Malaysia, who tell their parishioners or constituents that ethnically Chinese people are actually Jews, right? And because of the anti-Semitism, and that anti-Semitism, when it gets down to it, in a lot of cases, is just kind of a mobilization of working class resentment against the middle class. They perceive the middle class as having it better than them, and the middle class has a different relationship with money, a different value system. There are differences in how the working class and the middle class see things, right? And the perception is that Jews are middle class and that working class people are Christian, and that is the basis of anti-Semitism throughout many Western countries. If you look at the history of anti-Semitism, I think that's fascinating, right? I think it's very fascinating. And it's also like, it shows that it's bullshit, because there's plenty of middle-class people who aren't Jewish. There's plenty of Jewish working-class people. So, it's bullshit. But wokeism is a lot like anti-Semitism, because it doesn't direct people against the ruling class and against the power structure. It directs them against people they can see, right? It directs women against men. It directs black people against white people, right? The idea is you should be angry not at the power structure, not at the big bourgeoisie, not at the powerful, but at somebody who has it slightly better than you. Someone who's got 5%, 10%, 20% more than you, that's who you should be mad at. Women, be mad at men. Gay people, be mad at straight people. Trans people, be mad at non-trans people, right? That's what wokeism is about. It's a mobilization, and it's not about putting forward solutions to actually change things. It's just about anger and resentment, a lot like anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism isn't about like, let's fix society. Anti-Semitism is like, that group of people that, you think have more money than you or whatever. Well, aren't you mad at them? I'm mad at them. Yeah, I'm mad at them. I'm mad at them. It's the same kind of poison, right? It's just about stoking resentment, right? And that just like the Nazis used anti-Semitism, right, which was in a weird, distorted, ethnically bigoted state of mind that was really a kind of projection of working class resentment against the middle class, the wokeism is doing the same thing. It is about stoking the resentment of people against people they can see and not putting forward solutions. It's not about putting forward solutions. It's not about actually trying to change things. It's just about stoking resentment. The same way the Nazis used anti-Semitism, the ruling class of the United States is using wokeism, right? There's somebody who has it better than you for whatever reason. You're disabled, they're not disabled. You got abused when you were growing up. They didn't get abused when they were growing up. It's this whole game of stoking people's resentment, giving people permission to unleash their resentment, right? Are you angry? Well, you can go beat somebody up if they disagree with you. Are you angry? Well, let's find someone who disagrees with you about trans and get them fired from their job, right? That's wokeism. It is about stoking resentment against other people in your society. That's wokeism. What else is wokeism? It's degrowth. It's anti-populism. It's about stoking resentment. And on top of that, wokeism is anti-communism, and it's pro-imperialist. It says that all the various countries around the world that have broken out of Western capitalism are racist, sexist, homophobic, oppressing women, and it is your duty. It's not just good that the USA attacks these countries. It is your duty to have a Ukrainian flag in your yard to support those Nazis. It is your duty to try and get your friend banned from Facebook if he disagrees with the foreign policy in regards to Russia. It is your duty to condemn people, right? It is pro-imperialist. And that's what wokeism is. Wokeism is a distortion and a reinvention, a transformation of leftist politics into a new form of fascism. It's about driving down living standards to save capitalism. It's about viewing the masses of people as the enemy who need to be tightly controlled. It's about giving people permission to unleash their rage and their resentment, stoking rage in order to gain power. It is about supporting Western imperialism. That's what it is. That's what wokeism is. So we're talking about the history of wokeism and what it is. I'm sure someone's going to cut this and say that I said something anti-Semitic, which is not what I said here. I actually explained anti-Semitism and the confusion behind it, but whatever. What I just explained to you, that is what wokeism is. And we need to be very clear that wokeism is not socialism. And furthermore, we should be the vanguard of the working class struggle against wokeism. When Lenin said go lower and deeper to the real masses, this is what he meant. These people are the new fascists, and it is our job to build an anti-fascist united front. These people are the foot soldiers of imperialism. It is our job to build, just like the Chinese did, an anti-imperialist united front, a block of great classes against the fascists, against the imperialists. This is our job. There's a rising against wokeism that is blossoming all over the country. People are angry. People are tired of this. People are tired of not being able to say what they want to say. People are tired of being told they should be poorer and like it. People are tired of war and the danger of a new world war and their relatives coming home in body bags. People are tired of being told that they're not allowed to want jobs and education because that makes them a racist or it makes them a sexist if they want their living conditions to get better. People are tired of all of this. People are tired of not being able to ask questions about what's being taught in school. People are tired of a lot of things. And people say, well, Caleb, the people that are rising up against wokeism are right wing. Of course they are. Of course they are, because wokeism has hijacked and perverted and distorted all leftist spaces. So what else are they going to be, right? When the people who speak in the name of communism are promoting wokeism, if you're building a movement against wokeism, you're not going to be a communist. I mean, I mean, how can you expect them to be any different? How can you expect them to be any different? But wokeism is the main current the imperialists are using to try and stabilize their system right now. It is the main danger to the working class right now. So the battle against wokeism is a battle that communists need to be involved in. And that doesn't mean we support it, right? When they're pushing their anti-China stuff, we don't go along with that. We condemn it. We defend China. When they're, pushing for raids on immigrant communities and saying we need to round up all the immigrants and deport them, we don't support that. We oppose that because that would lead to a police state. And that's what the wokes want. They want a police state. We say, no, we don't want SWAT teams kicking down doors. We don't want millions of people to be deported. We don't want the kind of police state you would have to do. We don't support that, the more oppressed the immigrant communities become, the stronger the criminal gangs get. ICE are the best friends of MS-13. You make immigrant communities afraid to call the police. You make immigrant communities more in the shadows. Then their employers can exploit them even more and drive wages down even better. Then the MS-13 criminal gangs are flourishing, right? The more immigrant workers are legalized and brought into the light, the more employers are going to have to pay them decent wages. And on top of that, the more that the criminal gangs will be able to be eradicated and wiped out, that we don't support anti-immigrant bigotry. We don't support an immigration crackdown. We don't want to build a wall. We want to build high-speed railway. We want to build cities, Fusion City, right? We want to build power plants and schools. We don't want to build a wall. But a lot of the people that are mobilizing against the woke fascism, they are confused. So it's our job to go there and do the hard work of getting these people to understand that communism ain't woke. Go to Venezuela, communism is not woke, right? You go to Cuba, communism is not woke. Go to China, go to Vietnam, go to North Korea, communism is not woke. This woke stuff is a fascist, pro-imperialist, anti-human movement. That's what it is. And we need to oppose it. It is the new fascism. We need to oppose it. We need to oppose it. And that is our job. And so this is my message to you tonight. And I hope that I communicated a lot of helpful information. Because, I have a lot of knowledge of Marxism and history here. And I hope that this clarified a lot of things. So there we go. And I got a lot of super chats to answer. So why don't we do the roll call where I call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. And from there, we'll I think I'm going to play some music for you, and then we'll do the super chat question. So names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us? Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Jenny Lynn thinks I'm doing great stuff. Very good. Very, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very good. Ryan in Kansas City. We got Tom Tuttle in Tacoma. We got Noah and Crizzy from Fresno. We got Auckland, New Zealand. Yada Yisrael. We got Tyler in Missouri. CJ in Chicago. He just went by. I'll put him on the screen. We got Mark from Mission, Texas. Molly McGuire in Orange County. Los Angeles. Edward Allen in Kentucky. Windy, Oklahoma. Lori. Neil Frazier in Hong Kong. Shout out to you, Neil. Right? Smoggy Rob from Los Angeles, California. We got Douglas in Newfoundland. Patch in Arizona. Heidi in Edinburgh, Scotland. We got Palo Alto, Northern California. Zephyr from Eugene. Wellington in New Zealand. Bob Troy in New York. Good stuff, folks. Good stuff. We got Mr. Wonderful from Qantas. We got White Chocolate from Gary, Indiana. Very, very good. Kieran from San Diego. Mariah in Raleigh, North Carolina. Glad you're liking it, Mariah. I'm glad you like it. Hello, comrades from Moonlight Beach, California. St. David's, Bermuda. Kieran from San Diego. Good stuff. Good stuff. Good stuff. Good stuff. Names and locations. Names and location. Doctor from Waldorf, Oregon. Welcome, welcome, Doctor. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Jenny's Basement, as always. Brighton Thoughts. All righty. All righty. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. Herb Bryant from Florida. Colin in Greensboro. Very good. John Whitty in Houston. Very, very good. Very, very good. All right. Well, folks, I am going to put on, this is interesting. I wouldn't call this a communist song, what I'm about to play. This is a song, and this is a church choir or a church band, one of these like church praise bands or whatever. Oh, we got Noah Doughty in Florida, Cleveland Pirate Alex. Oh, Kinkies in Southern California, Mexico. But this is a song that was made famous by Elvis Presley. And it was written in the aftermath of the death of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You know, it's a particularly good song if you listen to it. You know, it's just kind of idealistic, wanting people to get along and stuff. It was made famous by Elvis Presley for his comeback. He closed his comeback special with it in 1968 after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Elvis did his comeback special. And he ended it with this song, If I Can Dream. And this is a church, like church band performing it. It's actually a woman singing it. But I thought I would put that on here. So we'll see. We'll see if YouTube, you know, gives me a problem over this. But I feel like they won't, because this isn't like Elvis performing it. This is just some church band performing it. But we shall see. We shall see.
To be birds flying higher in the sky, more blue. If I can dream of a better land where all my brothers walk hand in hand, tell me why, oh why can't my dream come true? Oh, why? Sometimes, so winter
righty. So yeah, I just thought that would be a great musical interlude. And I'm always trying to figure out what music I can get away with showing on here. We'll see if they take this stream down or something. But I feel like they won't. I don't feel like a church, it was like it was a church YouTube channel. So I don't feel like they're going to enforce a copyright. But you never know. You never know how these things go. If they take this stream down, well, they'll survive. All righty. So now I start answering super chat questions. And if folks have more super chats, pile them on, right? That's what I'm here to do. First question: what would be the implications of the KPRF taking power in Russia? Honestly, I can't think of what economic policies the KPRF would be doing differently. I feel like the KPRF, it would be mainly an aesthetic change, right? That a lot of the statues to like old czars and stuff would be taken down. There'd be a lot more promotion of Lenin and Stalin and Marxism. The Russian government doesn't believe in Marxism at this point. I mean, they're very clear about that. They are Russian nationalists. They're proud of the history of Russia, and they're proud of the Soviet Union and their role. But they do have a critique of Western capitalism and imperialism. But it's Russia's government does not espouse Marxism. If the KPRF were to come back to power, the Russian government would start espousing Marxism. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I'll just be honest with you. The Russian Communist Party, they do have a very big base of support in the country, but it's not expanding. And you should look at some of the interviews that have been done with, you can look into some of the stuff out there. The Communist Party of the Russian Federation, I think it's a great organization. I've learned a lot from them. And Zhuganov, I've read his biography, and but I don't see them coming to power anytime soon. I just don't. I'll be honest with you. There are some other there's like a patriotic socialist party or a new patriotic party or something. It's like a Marxist party in Russia, and that there are some interesting political parties in Russia. The main party is United Russia. Putin is no longer a member of United Russia. He's independent. He's above political parties. But United Russia is the main party. And then you have the Communist Party. Then you have the Liberal Democratic Party, which is the hard right-wing party. So there you go. All right, next question. What has AOC done for her district lately? Tweet. Exactly. I went to AOC's district to interview people about what socialism was. And I went to one of the biggest intersections in AOC's district, and nobody knew what socialism was. I mean, I finally found people, but it took me hours on the street asking people, what do you think about, AOC being a socialist? So many people didn't even know what it was. I'm just being honest with you. I was walking through AOC's district. I'm like, this is surreal, right? This is the area where the socialist AOC has been elected. The people in her district don't know what socialism is. Now, there are obviously some people who do, but I was shocked. So many of the high school kids who went by, they thought it was socializing, right? They thought it was people talking to other people, being social. Many people gave me that exact same answer. I said, what is socialism? And they said, well, it means socializing. It's like when you talk to your friends. I was like utterly shocked. And what has she done for her district? I mean, her district is not a great place to be. Let me just put it that way. Not the wealthiest part of New York, not a lot of economic opportunity there. And that's why I was hopeful when she first got elected. I was hoping that, because the guy she was replacing was this do nothing, dull machine Democrat. That's what it was. But I was hoping that she would, actually be like a new leftist voice, but she's not that. She's a fascist, right? AOC is a fascist, right? She wants to drive down living standards. She wants to censor the media. AOC is a fascist. She wants a new world war. She wants guns to the Nazis in Ukraine. She wants to, in the name of the January 6th, sting, entrapment sting. She wants to take away people's right to protest. She's a fascist as far as I'm concerned. So, of course, there you go. All righty. The economist Michael Hudson, the godson of Trotsky, talks about CIA funding of leftism publications. Glad I mentioned it. Yeah, I haven't read a lot of Michael Hudson. I've watched a number of his interviews, but Ryan Cotton, Class Analysis, is planning to give a talk about the financial system, drawing from Michael Hudson, at our upcoming conference. So come to the Summit Against Hypocrisy to hear Ryan Cotton talk about to talk about Michael Hudson and economics. So there you go. I'm looking forward to that talk by Ryan. I hope I learned something from it. And there you go. There you go. Did Huey Newton kill people for insulting him? I know what you're referring to. In the late years of Huey Newton's life, I think like there was somebody who insulted him and he punched them, and then he went to Cuba or something. And I don't know. I mean, I wasn't there. I do know that, the early years of the Black Panther Party, Huey Newton was doing some very amazing stuff. But the pressure, he was on death row. He was facing, death by gas chamber, at one point. And, being on death row, and then FBI infiltration of the Black Panther Party and all of that. And, he deteriorated. I mean, he ultimately deteriorated. He had a serious drug problem at the time of his death. Many people think his death was related to drug dealing or something. That Huey Newton, yes, he played a very heroic role at one time, but he deteriorated. And that happens sometimes, We got to get past this cancel culture where it's like if people do a bad thing, that becomes who they are forever, right? Huey Newton played a very good role at one point in his life. But yeah, by the early 80s, the Black Panther Party was falling apart. And that's a fact. And, I met Elaine Brown. That was one of the most interesting, like it was like 2 days I was in Cleveland where I got to hang out with Elaine Brown, who was, she was the first woman to be the chairwoman of the Black Panther Party. I'm tempted to repeat some of the jokes she tells, but probably wouldn't be appropriate for me as a white dude. But she was interesting to talk to. Let me just put it that way. And Elaine Brown, and I know there's a lot of people who think she was an informant. And that's that's COINTELPRO. Everyone thinks everyone else is an informant. I don't know about her life and all of that, but I do remember that Elaine Brown, right? Okay. And I do know that Elaine Brown, that her view was that, the Black Panther Party was heavily infiltrated. It was deteriorating. And she had a lot of interesting insights into organizing. And I remember one of the things that, at the time we were organizing in support of the Lucasville prisoners, who had been part of this prison uprising that happened in Lucasville. She was telling us that we should go to Lucasville, go to the town, where this prison is located, and talk to the working class people there. She was actually telling us we should go and organize low-income white workers. I remember that. She was saying, communists, you got to get out of the movement to the masses. I mean, she didn't use those words. I remember she was saying that. This is like the former chairwoman of the Black Panthers was saying, go organize low-income white people to be anti-imperialist. So there you go. There you go. Next question. Someone said, hey, how are you? I'm fine. Whatever. Look, there's a lot of weird trolling stuff going on social media. Whatever. If someone's trying to work some angle and make me look stupid or incite a fight between me and somebody else, don't. Please spare us. Spare us all, right? Really. Spare us all. If you like my stuff, you want to promote me, fine. But don't try to get me to fight with somebody else. I'm not interested in doing that. Really not interested in doing that. All right. Lisa Smith wished you do a joint interview with Michael Hudson and Richard Wolff. I would do that anytime. I would do it anytime. Lisa, I would be happy to do that. If Richard and Michael were available one day and they just wanted to sit down with me, Richard Wolff, I had the privilege, the honor of hanging out with him at the RT office a number of times. Being around that man is a privilege. We don't agree on everything. We have strong disagreements in our interpretation of Marxism. But he's a very, very brilliant man. And he's respectful. You know what I mean? He knows the Marxism and he knows his interpretation and he knows it's not the only one, right? Like, that's the thing. Like Richard Wolff, yeah, he emphasizes the whole worker cooperative thing, which is not my view, but he's very well educated and he's been around, he's studied Marxist literature. He's been to Marxist conferences around the world. He knows about the different interpretations. And he doesn't sit there. It's like these people on the internet. If you don't agree with them, you must be an idiot, right? Abolish billionaires. I remember talking to him at the time. I was being canceled on the internet for saying abolish billionaires is anti-Marxist. And he agreed with me. He said, yeah, technically, if you read what Marx says, the goal is for there to be so much wealth. And he understands that. Now, he frames things a different way than I do, but he's respectful, you know, and he understands that there are different interpretations, and that, you know, I mean, and that's the problem. All these people on the internet who don't know anything about communism, they're ignorant and arrogant. I think it was Mark Twain who said about there's a deadly combination in America of ignorance and arrogance, right? Where it's like these people, all they know about communism is the right-wing stereotype. It's everyone getting paid the same wage, you know, everyone gets paid the same wage. And so, you know, clearly you can't have billionaires because it's not about, I mean, it's like I'm trying to explain them critique of the Goethe program and the basis of the final stage of communism, eliminating social hierarchies. And they don't know any of this. They've never read Critique of the Goethe program. They don't understand what the higher stage of communism is about. All they know is like, wealth is bad. Rich people are bad. That's like the first thing about communism. Duh, rich people bad. It's like, well, no, the exploitation is bad, right? The idea is that, you know, that there's a group of people who own the economy who are making profits by making everyone else poorer. And, you know, it's not that wealth is inherently bad. That's not Marxism. Marxism seeks for there to be so much wealth that all social hierarchies can be broken down. That's what Marxism seeks. You know, that's what Marxism seeks. And these people, they will not listen to you. And you can show them quote after quote from Marx making this clear. And they will not listen to you. No, they know it all. And you're stupid, and you're a Nazi, and you're a fascist. And it's just like, it drives me crazy. That's not Richard Wolff, though. Richard Wolff, he knows. He knows his shit. He just knows that what he's doing, he's got his interpretation, his matter of emphasis. He's a smart person, right? I will say, I think in real life, most people are better. That's why in real life gatherings and conferences are so gosh darn important. Because on the internet, no one listens to anybody else. No one ever admits they were wrong about anything. No one ever tries to find common ground. The internet brings out this toxic, hostile, oh, you're stupid, oh, I own you, you know, but in real life, people actually have to listen. They can have a human interaction. The internet is the worst place to try and win someone to a different political view, right? If you are trying to change someone's mind or teach them something, don't do it on the internet. Don't do it on the internet, because on the internet, everybody, oh yeah, well, you know, you're stupid. You know, the internet is just a cesspool. But here I am on the internet trying to recruit people to a real life movement so we can actually change the world. So there you go. So come to the Summit Against Hypocrisy, right? Put it on the screen one more time. Be there, please. Be there. Be at the Summit Against Hypocrisy. This is where we need you. Come to the Summit Against Hypocrisy. Links are down below. Come and join a real life movement where we're actually trying to build an anti-imperialist community of solidarity. It's not just about tearing people down on the internet and feeling good about yourself. All righty. Next super chat question. Thoughts on Baathism and Bashar al-Assad? Well, right. So the Syrian Baath and the Iraqi Baath separated from each other, right? In Syria, they maintain, so the founder of Baathist Arab socialism is a guy named Michel Aflaq. Michel Aflaq was from a Christian Syrian family. He became a communist atheist, and he was in the Syrian Communist Party. And when France was aligned with the Soviet Union because it was against the Nazis, the Syrian communists were being told not to fight for their independence from the French colonizer. And he was a fighter against colonialism. He didn't like that his people were being colonized by the French. And so he broke away from the Syrian Communist Party and he started his own communist party, or his own party, called the Baath Arab Socialist Party. Baath means renaissance or rebirth in Arabic. And it was the Baath Party. And the Baath Party, they study Marxism, they teach Marxism in their schools. I mean, Baathism is very heavily influenced by Marxism, but they argue that there needs to be a special form of socialism for the Arab world. Socialism with Arab characteristics, more or less, right? And they were aligned with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union referred to Syria and Iraq, the Baath countries, as socialism-oriented governments, or SOGs. You know, these are socialist countries, but the Syrian Baath, right? Baathism in Syria was started by, a Syrian guy. One of the main points of Baathism is they want the entire Arab world to be united in one country. That's one of the main things. They want all the Arab peoples. They say there's one Arab nation, right? That all Arabs should be one. It's Arab nationalism, pan-Arabism. It's a big part of Baathism. The Syrian Ba'ath and the Iraqi Ba'ath had a falling out. Michel Aflaq sided with the Iraqi Ba'ath. And so in Syria, they maintain that there's another guy, and I forget his name. They credit him with Baathism. They claim that Michel Aflaq plagiarized Baathism from this other guy. And so they actually claim a different lineage for Baathist Arab socialism, which is very interesting. There's another intellectual, another Arab intellectual that they consider to be the father of Baathism. And they consider Michel Aflaq to be a traitor. And yeah, there you go. There you go. All right, next question. Are we closer to World War III than ever before? I mean, who's to say? I mean, that certainly scared me, that drone thing. You know, it certainly scared me when that, you know, that missile went into, you know, it went into Poland, and the U.S. media said it was one thing, and that scared me. I mean, it looks that way to me, but I don't know. I mean, you know, I hope not. I hope that cooler heads will prevail. But, you know, nuclear, you know, World War III is not a joke. World War III comes, we're all fucked. You know, so, you know, I mean, let's just hope not. Because if World War III comes, yeah, we're in a boatload of trouble. The human race, you know, nuclear war, you're dead. You know, nukes go off, you're dead. We're all dead. Yeah, let's hope that doesn't happen. But you know, and that's why it's urgent that people protest, and that's why this internet squabbling that people get into is just so childish and irrelevant. You think any of that'll matter if there's a nuke going off? No, 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 no. All right, Michael Hudson called the Democrats the right wing of the Republican Party. I think what Michael Hudson, I assume, I don't know the context of him saying that. I assume he's referring to the fact the Republican Party historically has been the more free market party. Right? They've been the party of more libertarian economics. And especially since the 1980s and the rise of the Democratic Leadership Council of Bill Clinton, the Democrats have also embraced those kind of policies. Neoliberal economics, right? Milton Friedman was originally part of Nixon's administration. He was Nixon's economic advisor, but then Nixon fired him, right? But then after Nixon was removed, you know, when Gerald Ford came in, that's when Ayn Rand was brought to the White House to swear in her protege, Alan Greenspan. That's when Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney got into the government, and that Gerald Ford's administration kind of opened the floodgates of neoliberalism, but it was a Republican thing, right? But Reagan continued it. And then, you know, Bill Clinton in the 80s, Bill Clinton became governor of Arkansas. And Bill Clinton pushed this idea that the reason the Democrats were weak is they were too far left economically, right? And Bill Clinton pushed the idea that, you know, you could be an advocate of neoliberal austerity economics and also be a liberal, right? And then he introduced a new strand of Democratic Party thinking that was very much you know, in line with neoliberal economics. There's a real parallel between Tony Blair and Bill Clinton, right? Just like Bill Clinton had the Democratic Leadership Council in the United States, Tony Blair had something called New Labour, and their arguments were roughly the same. Now, the Labour Party in Britain claimed to be a socialist party. They actually had this thing called Clause 4 in their constitution that said, you know, the Labour Party seeks a society where the means of production are controlled by the working class, etc. Tony Blair removed Clause 4 from the Labour Party's constitution, replaced it with this statement that they're a democratic socialist party and socialism just means a good economy for everyone. You know, they removed Clause 4, and he moved the Labour Party in a much more pro-free market, pro-neoliberalism direction. Now, the Democrats never called themselves socialists, but there was a Roosevelt wing of the Democratic Party. They had this kind of economic populist tradition. You know, and I think there's a quote from Jerry Brown, who was the governor of California. And he said, you know, Bill Clinton has started a new, I'll pull up the quote if I can. It's a good quote. Jerry Brown. See if I can find the quote. Let me see if I can find it. It's a good quote. He said, it's like, there's a new Democratic Party that Bill Clinton has started. It's a party of big business and privatizations and cutbacks, and I don't want to be part of it, or something like that. You watch you listen to the Jerry Brown, Bill Clinton debates, there is a real economic difference. Not that Jerry Brown wasn't, a sellout and all that, but Jerry Brown is much more of an old school liberal. Ooh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Doesn't surprise me. And that you could say that Reagan is very much responsible for Bill Clinton. That Clinton came in. It came in because at the end of the day, and this is really interesting, sometimes you need a liberal to do austerity, right? If Reagan had tried to do half the things that Bill Clinton did, there would have been massive resistance, right? Bill Clinton was a liberal, right? And that because he was a liberal, a lot of the forces that would have protested and resisted it didn't. For example, Bill Clinton got rid of welfare as we know it, right? He got rid of, basically cash assistance. It used to be a lot easier in the United States, if you were low income, to get cash assistance. Bill Clinton got rid of that. If Reagan had done that, there would have been massive protests and resistance. All the labor unions would have been out there. There you go. Bill Clinton brought in NAFTA, right? And the North American Free Trade Agreement. And again, if Reagan had done that, Reagan did the PATCO thing, and that was enough to get the labor movement mad at him. But Bill Clinton, he did NAFTA. What else? I mean, there's many examples of this. But Bill Clinton, he bombed former Yugoslavia. He got rid of Glass-Steagall, very good example. Bill Clinton did things that you had to have a Democrat do them, because if a Republican had done them, there would have been resistance. Reagan did a lot of bad things, but some of the bad things that Reagan did were like, it was almost like kind of like with Trump, where they find something that will make liberals mad that's not that big of a deal. Like one of the big things during the Reagan administration was that Reagan, he said that ketchup was a vegetable. Remember that? I mean, this was a big thing in the Reagan administration. It was like, kids in school need to have healthy food. And in one of his Reagan's like school lunch proposals, they listed ketchup as a vegetable. And they're like, oh, see, they don't want to feed our kids real vegetables. So they said ketchup was a vegetable. Well, that's bad. It's dumb, but it's like, compared to Bill Clinton taking millions of people off welfare, it's not huge. Now, PATCO, right? That was the first time you had a president invoke the Taft-Hartley anti-labor law to break a strike, right? And that's a big deal, right? He broke the air traffic controllers' strike, ordered them back to work. Anyone who didn't go back to work was fired and permanently fired from being an air traffic controller. Outlawed, basically broke the strike. Well, that's a big deal, but that's one union. Look at Bill Clinton with NAFTA. He destroyed many more union jobs with NAFTA, right? Mass incarceration. Reagan was doing some of that, right? Reagan was certainly doing some of that. But if you listen to what, at the time, Biden and Clinton were trying to one-up him on it. At the time, Bill Clinton was saying we need more police on the street. Bill Clinton was saying we need to have tougher. And it was actually, Reagan started all of that with the war on drugs. He started that, but then the response of Biden and Bill Clinton and, Al Gore, they said we can do better. That was their response. And so they like one-upped it. And there's many examples of this, that the Democrats doing what the Republicans wouldn't have gotten away with doing. And under Obama, destroying Libya, right? Reagan bombed Libya, but he didn't attack Libya, right? Or he didn't invade Libya, right? The first black president of the United States invaded and overthrew and destroyed the most prosperous country in Africa. Try to process that for a moment. The first black president of the United States, whose father was an African, destroyed the most prosperous African country. Also, who was the first president to ever cut food stamps, to cut the amount of food assistance that low-income families get? Barack Obama. Right? No other president had ever done that. And there would have been riots in the streets, even if Bill Clinton had done it, right? Because Bill Clinton was a white guy, right? That cutting food stamps, right? That's taking food out of the mouths of hungry children. Obama did that as part of his austerity. He reduced the amount of aid that low-income families get. It's devastating. It's awful. Barack Obama did it. And What's interesting is part of the reason Black Lives Matter, I went to Ferguson. I made a documentary in Ferguson about the uprising there. Part of what was driving, the Ferguson rebellion and then the Baltimore rebellion was the fact that the police state stuff got worse under Obama. The Black community was expecting that the police state stuff would get better. And it wasn't just because Obama was Black. It was also because of the fact that Obama was using social media to stoke anger about those kind of things. You remember the Gina 6, right? As Obama was running, social media suddenly made this campaign about the Gina 6. And it was, it was a case of racial injustice and in a small town in Louisiana. And, but social media really made it into something. And that was setting the stage for Obama. And that Obama used social media to raise awareness about racial issues. But when it got down to it, the police state stuff that the Black community was facing got worse under his administration. And that's what made, Ferguson explode and Baltimore explode. Like BLM was a response to the fact that Obama was doing two things. On the one hand, he was talking about racism more, and the Democratic Party and Silicon Valley were talking about police brutality and racism. But on the other hand, the actual problem of police brutality was getting worse. And so it exploded. I support Black Lives Matter. I think that Black Lives Matter Incorporated, and I think that, the movement has been, manipulated and controlled just like any other social movement, but the cause was just. I was going to going to court with police brutality victims in Cleveland, long before that had ever been tweeted. I videotaped an act of police brutality in Cleveland. Sergeant Butler beat the hell out of these two teenage girls, and they were walking out of their high school to protest teacher layoffs. And luckily I was there to film the whole thing, So, I went to Ferguson. I made a documentary, very, very sympathetic to the protesters. These people, they have it in their heads that I'm a white supremacist, I'm not that, I'm just not that. So, it's just, but no one ever wants to hear anything different. They've decided, oh, Caleb's a white supremacist, so I must be. You look at my whole history and who I've been and where I've been and what I've done, and I can show you all the receipts, but no, I'm a white supremacist. No, it's just a fact. So, what do you say at this point, right? There's nothing to say. There's really nothing to say. But yeah, Obama's presidency, what else? Obama did a lot of things that a Republican wouldn't have gotten away with doing. I think that that's kind of what Michael Hudson is getting at. That's kind of what Michael Hudson is getting at, I would assume. So there you go. All right, folks. I think tomorrow I'm going to do the patrons only stream. If not, it'll be very soon because I'm going to be in DC soon, and I probably can't do the patrons only stream in DC. I guess I could. We'll see. I'm going to be in DC next week in the lead up to the Summit Against Hypocrisy. Please register for the Summit Against Hypocrisy. Please come to the Summit Against Hypocrisy. Please donate to the Summit Against Hypocrisy. This is the most important event CPI has done yet. We have done a lot of different events that have been great. Our conference in Chicago was mentioned in Newsweek magazine. We gave a platform to Tara Reid to call out Joe Biden. That was awesome. Garland Nixon was there, and that was awesome. Nick Brana was there. That was awesome. We did a conference in Austin with, various social media personalities. Peter Coffin was there. That was awesome. We did our national training school in Lynn Valley, Kansas. That's where I first met Tyler, and Tyler is awesome. We did our Saxton training school like 2 years ago in Saxton, Pennsylvania. That was awesome. But this is another level of awesome. This is a full 2 days. We got a communist leader from Britain coming into town. This is like amping things up to a whole nother level. So you don't want to miss this. You really don't want to miss this. This is something very, very special. So I just want to make that clear. And on that note, I am going to put on the closing music, and I think that'll be our stream for tonight.
New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.
Thanks, Herb. Thank you. Much appreciated.